If I've ever exploited anybody, it's for their own benefit. It's because they want to be exploited. I never exploit anybody that doesn't want to be exploited.
In the late 1950s, he became Gene Vincent's manager. He went on to handle a string of classic British bands, including the Small Faces, The Move and ELO. Arden had been a performer himself on Britain's post-war variety circuit. This had given him a shrewd understanding of artists and stagecraft. His pop instinct, theatrical flair and relish for intimidation made him unique in British pop management.
Whenever I met him, he was always on stage, because he's a performer.
He did look tough, and he could give you a stare that you think, oh my God, I better not get too close.
If you did a deal with him and you were straight, no worries, everything was fine. But try to get slick on him, then forget about him. It was, you know, batten down the hatches. You better get some help. You're going to need it.
In the mid-60s, Don's reputation cast a giant shadow over London. The story of the way Arden dangled rival manager Robert Stigwood out of a window has become one of the most notorious sagas in pop.
It's never stopped being the favourite after-dinner story. Everybody that comes into show business hears about Don Arden and the Stigwood story.
Don had discovered that Stigwood was trying to lure away the Small Faces. He assembled a team of heavies and planned his raid in meticulous detail.
I said, we've got to teach this guy a lesson. But at the same time, I wanted a scene from the movie. We arranged that when we came in, one guy, the first thing he would do was ask the girl to move from the switchboard, because nobody must be able to make phone calls. We formed this triangle. See, I was in the point of the triangle, and I said, each step I take, I said, you follow me. I'll do the talking, and I'm going to say, if it ever happens again, we're going to throw him through the window. And I said, you must say, fuck him, let's give it to him now, you say. They decided amongst themselves, for laughs, to go one further and let me think that they were going to throw him over. And I must admit that at one time, I thought, fucking hell, I think these guys have gone nutty or something.
The police were called to Stigwood's office. By now, the terrified entrepreneur had gathered his wits and had come to see Don's point of view.
No, he said, Mr. Arden did come here. He said, but he was a perfect gentleman. I mean, bless his heart, you know, it's the first time he'd ever been confronted by anything like me, you know. I'm sure he saw the humorous side of it afterwards.
A few weeks later, the Small Faces turned up at my office and said, would I manage them? And wary of being hung from the window, my office was on the second floor, so I didn't really fancy it. I thought the best thing was to call up Don, so I called Don and said, I've got the Small Faces in my office, you know, they're asking me to manage them. And he started to explain. I said, no, calm down. I said, look, obviously they're going to go on doing that. Obviously they want to leave you because they keep going to other people. Why don't we make a deal? I said, I'll manage them and I'll split it with you. And that way, you know, that's a really good settlement. You don't have to do any work, you get half the money. And Don said, oh, Simon, that's wonderful. Oh, you're a real gentleman. What a good idea. Why don't other managers behave as well as you? That's fantastic. All right, we'll do it. And I said, well, wait a minute. They haven't actually said they want me to manage them yet. They may not agree I am going to be the manager. He said, oh, bloody will. I'll be round and break their legs in 5 minutes.
Arden's journey to the heart of the swinging 60s began in Manchester in 1926, when he was born in the shadow of Strangeways Prison. Don's devout Jewish parents hoped that one day his fine singing voice would make him a cantor at the local synagogue.
There was a time in history, you know, whether it's songwriting history, comedians, managers, you know, the Jewish people who came in, the immigrants, you know, they all seem to have this relentless ambition to be somebody. And Don was one of those. He came at a time when he wanted to make something of himself because he was very, very poor. And I think being Jewish, that comes with the territory.
Don wanted a bigger stage and a more adoring crowd than the synagogue could offer. At 13, he was appearing in vaudeville as a precocious all-round entertainer, mimicking famous operatic tenors and impersonating Hollywood movie stars.
When he first went away from home, Mother and I used to walk wherever we were going with tears rolling down our cheeks, worrying about him.
I was on the road. And
he didn't tell her how tough it was at first.
Vaudeville was the highest ranking. But it served its purpose, really. And, you know, there's very little left for me to learn about that kind of business, you know.
He's very Jewish as a performer, in as much as he's very emotional. He would sing Some of These Days of Sophie Tucker, and you would cry. And he'd do My Yiddish Mama, and it was wonderful. Of course, it sounds so dated when you talk about it now, but at the time, he was a terrific performer with a fine voice, a real good tenor voice. I think he'd like to have been Pavarotti, really, in another life.
I like to hear him impersonate these various singers. I mean, I always loved his singing the emotional, the ballads, the Jewish songs at the Jewish concerts. You know, it used to have the ladies crying in the aisles, the London Casino.
You see, you don't make money making ladies cry.
Well, I don't know. You were doing okay in those days.
Well, it's Saturday night and I just got paid. Fool about my money, don't try to save.
Don made a good living in vaudeville, but the sound of rock and roll music from across the Atlantic signalled its death knell. His performing days were numbered, but he foresaw an exciting new future as a rock and roll promoter. His toughness and tenacity made him perfectly equipped for the job, but he found British rock and roll too insipid. Arden wanted the hard stuff from America.
When I started producing shows and became an agent on top of that, I went to find out why it was that we never saw these rock and rollers here. And the answer was simple. Nobody's fucking asked for them.
He saw a niche. I mean, what do you do if you're in business in those days, particularly if you're walking on the wild side? What do? You look for the niche. You look for something that nobody else wants to sell, but you see there's a demand for it. He saw that and he dived in. And he may no longer have been a singer, but he was an agent. He was still involved in show business, and he was going to have his way with it. He was going to be part of this new structure that, in many respects, was a kind of strange quasi-criminal infrastructure, a structure that was about anti-establishment.
Promoting this new music demanded a new attitude. Arden found it in the 17-year-old Andrew Oldham, who he hired to publicise his Little Richard tour. But Cecil Bernstein, owner of the Granada theatre chain, wouldn't tolerate Oldham's attempts to incite teen violence.
So I wrote up this very exuberant press release inviting the press to come and see the theatres torn apart and ripped up. And Johnny Hamp or Cecil Bernstein or somebody basically said to Don, you know, either the press agent goes or the tour does.
Cancel the tour, so it was fucking sold out. He was willing to cancel that tour. He was such an idiot, Bernstein, which is very unusual for a Jew in business. I had to change Andrew.
I always wanted to be in show business. Standing next to Don Arden, you were. Your points of reference, which were basically the larger-than-life characters, you know, known recently as the Jews who ran Hollywood, you know, Here was a Jew who ran London, and thank God.
But despite Arden's fiery American visitors, feeble ballads and tepid pop had a stranglehold on the British charts at the start of the 60s. The UK wasn't prepared for a rock and roll heart attack. It was in the rowdy German port of Hamburg that Don found a noisier welcome for his tours. Arden bought a share of the Star Club in the sleaziest quarter of the city. It was here that the Beatles and many young British groups were infected by the raging energy of American rock and roll.
I remember the night when we opened the Star Club, and I was looking outside about half an hour before we opened the Star Club, and I couldn't believe it. The people were standing from there till the end of the street.
One day we're at the Star Club and all of a sudden in walks Gene Vincent with Don Arden. I thought he looked like Little Caesar walking in, Edwin G. Robinson, and like, hey, I'm Don Arden, here I am. There were other promoters, but these other promoters dealt basically with British acts. And but Don, oh, he was on a plane off to New York, and he'd get these acts and he'd bring them over. He was the man. Absolutely, he was the man.
The new musical hybrid smuggled back from Hamburg by the Beatles put a bomb under British pop, and it made Arden's rock and roll tours obsolete overnight. To survive, Arden would have to create and manage his own stars. He jumped smartly aboard the bandwagon of the British beat boom.
I started to think what my next move was, and that's really when I decided to make my own stars. I realised that there was much more money in records and management.
Arden went hunting for promising young pop groups. One day, the four undernourished East End scruffs who made up the Small Faces turned up at his office in Carnaby Street.
8 o'clock at night, I was free to see them. I spoke to them for 30 minutes, and in that 30 minutes, I gave them the gig at Margate, and the bill was already full, but I squeezed 5 minutes off everybody else, and I said, I'll give you 10 quid for expenses. And that was it. You know, when they walked out and they started to play, I mean, I thought at that time, the first hearing, I thought it was the best band in the world at that time.
A kind of Jewish teddy bear, I suppose, if you like. You liked him immediately because he was enthusiastic, and he talked about what he could do and what he couldn't do, and whatever he said, I'll do this, I'll do that, he did, and it came true.
The first thing was to feed them, get them clothes, somewhere to live, and indeed give them transportation so that they were always together. There was no excuse to be late in the studio, late for a gig. It was all there laid on for them.
I've got this new group that's going to be really massive, called the Small Faces, he said, and I want a song something like Do-Wah Diddy Diddy, he said to me. You know? But we finished that right in Show La La, which took us about 5 minutes. And I gave him that, and he was over the moon about it.
Carnaby Street was open to them, and they purchased whatever they wanted. And in no time at all, the press really thought it was brilliant the way their image fitted their music. It was a complete package.
He could take a band, see the potential in it, and then create what the public saw after some coaching, after finding the right songs for them, the right producer, and then go into the record company and tell them how it should be marketed.
Well, we're striving for perfection all the time. What we feel is perfection, and as the boys have attained such terrific amount of success recently, we feel that we have achieved some sort of perfection.
There was definitely a reputation to Don Arden that, you know, he could do things. He could get records played on the air, he could get you on television.
Competition for chart positions was frantic, and Don knew how to guarantee the small faces a big hit.
I did something that I had done before, which was perfectly legal, was to hire housewives to go out and buy the record for us, to legitimately go into a shop and buy, let's say, instead of getting one single, they'd buy 3 or 4 singles.
I used to see records in there, I used to notice it, records would be like number 10 one week and then back to 72 the next. I mean, no record drops that fast or goes up that fast. I mean, that was that was in those days when Don was about. I'm not saying because of him or anything, but I mean, everybody was into hyping and all that. I mean,
with the small faces, we only did it 2 weeks because they were away. They were actually away. But if somebody said Don Arden spent thousands hyping the record. Oh, if you want to say, I spent thousands hyping the record, okay, yeah, I spent thousands hyping the record. What do you think of that? So what? So what?
Don's chart-fixing activities brought him to the attention of the police. They would be seeing more of each other in years to come.
I think one guy came round to see me from Scotland Yard, and he said, I've read, you know, I did this laddie bit, you know. I'm always ready for that laddie. I said, we just paid young women to go out and buy our own record. Now, if they had a case, they'd have made a case. But whatever I did was to help the record, and whether they like it or not, it wasn't illegal.
Arden arrived in the cosy world of British pop management like a boot through a plate glass window. Don was noisy and aggressive, in stark contrast to a man like the Beatles manager Brian Epstein.
Brian Epstein was a very quiet, classy, graceful, elegant man. And Don Arden was the opposite. I mean, he was brash, he was loud, and I never found, as I say, threatening, but he was entirely different. I mean, because he was more rock and roll than Brian Epstein or Gordon Mills or those people of the day. And he would just thunder in, you know, where angels fear to tread.
His belief was, in business, if you do a deal, live by it. That is what he believed. He actually believed that. And I think that he deserves praise for that. Because I'd been an artist for 20 years and suffered, I believed that if it was time to go in and ask for more money, that's exactly what I did. And I became, I think, infamous for that.
In the early 60s, management was still a developing art. Record companies didn't understand how huge pop would become. Arden saw that he could grab the business by the lapels and shake it into submission. It was a sleepy cottage industry, and Arden was about to trample all over it.